dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan muna gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga polisiya at programa ng pamahalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga polisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan diin ng kahalagahan ng polisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag polisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan!
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socioeconomic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
Dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan mo na gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga polisiya at programa ng pamalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga polisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan din ng kahalagahan ng polisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag pulisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan.
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socio-economic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
Welcome to the PIDS webinar series. Before we start our virtual event, we have some reminders. For attendees, your microphone is automatically muted upon entry. If you wish to join the discussion, click the Q&A icon, type your question, and click send. For Facebook viewers, you may send your question using the comment section. Remember to keep your questions concise and direct to the point. We will screen all questions to ensure that they are relevant to the webinar topic and the presentation. The moderator will read the questions during the open forum and cover as many as possible depending on the available time. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on the PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages. The recording will also be made publicly available on the PIDS YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your active participation.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to our webinar on today entitled Toward Achieving Universal Broadband Access in the Philippines. This webinar is being conducted in line with the celebration of the National Information and Communications Technology Month. I am Sonny Domingo and I'll be your host and moderator this morning. By 2029, the population share with internet access in the Philippines is forecasted to increase by 15.5%. While this expands the broadband market, it also brings to fore challenges such as infrastructure development and service affordability. Infrastructure development is paramount in meeting the rising demand for internet services. Ensuring affordability is equally vital to guarantee access for individuals across all socioeconomic strata. To shed light on how to bridge the digital divide and promote digital inclusivity, we feature a study that examines the need for universal broadband access. Before we begin, we invite you to actively engage with us via the Q&A box in Zoom or the comment section via Facebook Live. Now to formally start and welcome you, please welcome the PIDS President, Dr. Aniceto Orbeta Jr. to give his opening remarks. Dr. Orbeta, please.
Good morning and welcome to our public webinar on Towards Achieving Universal Broadband Access in the Philippines. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the following: House of Representatives, Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department Deputy Secretary General Romulo Emmanuel Miral Jr., College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants Director Alvin Navarro, National Anti-Poverty Commission Chief of Policy Elizabeth Milo, Polytechnic University of the Philippines Head Presidential Management Staff Susana Luna, Innovations for Poverty Action Research Manager Somia Puchar, USAID Senior Economic Growth Specialist Jan Avila, Udina Infrastructure Corporation Assistant Vice President Manuel Hamonio. Let me also greet our guests, officials, and colleagues from the government, academe, civil society, media, private sector, as well as those watching through the PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages. This month, we celebrate the National ICT Month under the inspiring theme, Bayang Digital at Bagong Pilipinas. In solidarity with the Department of Information and Communications Technology, PIDS celebrates our collective journey towards digital transformation. Today's webinar highlights the PIDS study, Making Broadband Universal, a review of Philippine Policies and Strategies, authored by PIDS research fellows Ramonette, Serafica and Kris Francisco, and research specialist Oren. This study is a valuable resource in our digital transformation journey, offering insights and strategies to achieve universal broadband access. The widening access gap in broadband internet between the affluent and the underprivileged in the Philippines prevents many from seizing digital opportunities. Despite having had internet access for 3 decades, the country continues to grapple with insufficient broadband infrastructure. PIDS book revealed that the Philippines lag behind in its ASEAN counterparts in digital performance indicators, including digital transformation, trade, connectivity, and innovation. According to a 2022 World Bank report, only 33% of the households in the Philippines had fixed broadband access, and just 70% of the population had an active mobile broadband subscription. These figures falls notably below the ASEAN averages of 41% and 101% respectively. This statistics also means that the Philippines accounts for over half of the unconnected population to mobile broadband in the ASEAN region. Broadband internet in the Philippines is also comparatively more expensive than in neighboring countries. The annual fee for fixed broadband constitutes a significant portion of per capita gross national income, or GNI, double the ASEAN average. Similarly, the mobile broadband costs a higher percentage of the per capita GNI in the Philippines than the ASEAN average. Moreover, the country's policy environment for affordable broadband ranks among the least favorable in ASEAN regions. Our affordability driver index scores indicate sluggishness in implementing reforms to enhance broadband affordability compared to other nations. These issues are critical as digitalization and reliable internet access are potent drivers of good governance, broad-based growth, labor inclusivity, and climate and disaster resilience. Failing to address the broadband policy issues could result in missed social, political, and economic opportunities. Therefore, today's presentation's thematic focus is significant and timely. We have the 2 main authors of this study, Dr. Serafica and Dr. Francisco. The Department of Information Commission Technology Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Management, Philip Varilla, joins them, who will share the government's initiative to drive broadband diffusion in underserved areas. We are also honored to have World Bank Senior Digital Development Specialist Naoto Kanehira with us, who will share his insights on the policy and regulatory reforms needed to drive competition and investment in broadband infrastructure for the Philippines. To our attendees, please stay until the end of the webinar. I encourage you to participate actively in the open forum. Thank you. I will now give back the floor to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Orbeta. I know that we are all excited to hear the presentations from our resource speakers, but first, let me ask a very quick poll question to know the views of our participants regarding the topic. As mentioned earlier, our discussion will focus on the strategies to increase broadband adoption in the Philippines. With that, the question is, which factor is most important to you when choosing a broadband service provider? Speed of the internet connection, cost of the plan, customer service, reliability, or bundled services like TV streaming service, subscription, landline. So for those joining via Zoom, click on the link provided in your chat box. For those joining via Facebook Live, click the link in the comments section. So again, let me repeat the question. Which factor is most important to you when choosing a broadband service provider? Speed, cost of the plan, customer service, reliability, or bundled services? So just quickly answer. And then in a few seconds, we'll be showing you the result of our very quick poll. Right now, we have almost 200 participants via Zoom and Facebook Live. Okay, so let us see the poll results. I guess most of you prefer speed of internet connection, and I guess it's probably the same for us, particularly when you are doing video conferencing. So having that done, let us now proceed with the presentations from our resource speakers. So as mentioned by Dr. Orbeta, our webinar features a study titled Making Broadband Universal, a review of Philippine policies and strategies. This study highlights the importance of broadband adoption in advancing digitalization as outlined in the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028, focusing on ensuring equitable access to digital opportunities. It provides a comprehensive overview of strategies to increase broadband adoption in the country through an assessment of the current landscape of broadband services, highlights existing policies and initiatives at both the national and community levels. We are very honored today to have all the authors as presenters this morning. In order of presentation, allow me to introduce our speakers. First speaker, Dr. Ramonette B. Serafica is a Senior Research Fellow at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, specializing in services, policy, regulation, and trade. Dr. Serafica is currently examining regulatory and competition issues in the Philippine digital sector. Our second speaker, Ms. Queen Cell Oren, is a research specialist also at PIDS. She has a bachelor's degree in statistics from UP Diliman and studying MA in psychology also in the same university. Finally, we have Dr. Kris Francisco, who is also a research fellow at PIDS. Prior to joining PIDS, she was an associate professor at De La Salle University School of Economics. She was also a consultant at the Department of Trade and Industry and an associate at the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo, Japan. Her areas of specialization are in development economics, applied econometric analysis, transportation economics, and more. Dr. Francisco has a PhD degree in public economics from the National Graduate Research Institute for Policy Studies in Tokyo, Japan. Thank you for joining us today. To our authors and presenters, you may take the virtual floor.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present our study on broadband. This is actually part of a broader research agenda on ICT. In recent years, the PIDS has examined the state of ICT access, use, and infrastructure in the country. And we've also looked at the regulatory regime and the competition landscape. So for this morning, our focus will be on specific government interventions or programs. Next slide, please. So I will deliver the first part of the presentation, then Ms. Oren will handle the second half. We'll provide an overview of the concepts and general strategies that have been employed to increase broadband adoption. Next, we will give a general picture of the state of broadband services in the Philippines before we discuss the policies and strategies that have been pursued. We will then talk about specific programs of the government and then conclude with some recommendations. In the next presentation, Dr. Kris Francisco will elaborate more on the cross-sectoral issues. Next slide, please. So, access to broadband is a policy priority both nationally and globally. Universal access to information and communications technology, including the internet, is one of the targets under Goal 9 of the SDGs. And in 2022, the UN Secretary General asserted that leaving no one behind means leaving no one offline. In the first State of the Nation address of the President, he emphasized the importance of universal connectivity to ensure that digitalization benefits everyone. And accelerating digitalization is one of the cross-cutting strategies identified in the development plan. Specific chapters in the plan to improve connectivity include Chapter 10 on promoting competition and improving regulatory efficiency, and also in Chapter 12 on expanding and upgrading infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what is broadband? It is essentially high-speed access to the internet. The policy-defined minimum speed varies across jurisdiction and changes over time. So for example, in 2015, the National Telecommunications Commission defined entry-level broadband as internet connection with at least 256 kilobits per second speed. In the ITU, the transmission capacity defined by the ITU standards sector is at least 1.5 or 2.0 megabits per second. And then in the US, the regulator, the Federal Communications Commission, considers broadband to have a speed of 25 Mbps downstream and 3 Mbps upstream. So as shown in this table, the required internet speed differs depending on the service or application. Next slide, please. Again, another example for the US, they provided a guide for households. So the table compares the minimum download speed required for light, moderate, and high household usage with one or more devices to ensure satisfactory performance for each application. Next slide, please. So now that we have defined broadband, next we have to understand what does universal service or access mean. So the universal service goal in telecommunications is a public policy that aims to provide telecommunications to the majority of the population. And because this is a policy, then the government must make the necessary funding available, either directly or indirectly. Now, over time, it has been applied to different types of ICTs. So according to Blackman and Srivastava, there are two distinct levels of service provision. A universal service pertains to service to individuals or households, while access focuses on making services available at a publicly shared level. So for example, telecenters in communities. However, these two concepts now overlap and coexist. So it has led to the generic term universal access and service. Moreover, there are three characteristics of UAS, and these are availability. So this means the service is available or on hand to inhabited parts of the country through public, community, shared, or personal devices. Another aspect is accessibility. All citizens can use the service regardless of location, gender, disabilities, and other personal characteristics. And affordability. The service is affordable or within one's means to all citizens. It should be noted that in the implementing rules and regulations of the Telecom Act, universal access is defined as the availability of reliable and affordable telecommunication services in both urban and rural areas of the country. Next slide, please. So these are just the general strategies that could be employed in achieving universal access and services. The point here is that both supply and demand factors, as well as the interplay of these factors, are essential to attain the greatest broadband adoption and penetration rates. So in this scenario, the government can play different roles. So the government can act as an enabler by lowering the barriers to entry or removing the restrictions to supply services or to create and consume content. The government can also act as a facilitator through measures that reduce the cost of network expansion, including reducing regulatory burden to accelerate infrastructure build-out. And then on the demand side, the government can help lower the total cost faced by the consumers of broadband and other online services and content creators or developers. Now, finally, the government can also act as the provider itself to ensure that services needed by the population are available, particularly in areas or communities that are not economically viable. So the table features some of the examples of various government interventions, both on the supply and the demand side. Next slide, please. Okay, so this table shows the targets under Chapter 12 of the Development Plan. And it aims to improve accessibility, affordability, and quality of internet services. So here, access is measured in terms of households with internet access and individuals using the internet. And as of 2019, this is based on the National ICT Household Survey, only 17.7% of households and 47% of individuals have internet access. And then in terms of the affordability, the target follows the international benchmark, which should be less than 2% of monthly gross national income per capita. And then the third set of indicators is about speed for fixed and mobile broadband. Next slide, please. So what is the current state? According to ITU estimates, 72.3% of individuals were using the internet in the Philippines in 2022. About 8 per 100 people have fixed broadband subscription, while 7 out of 10 people have active mobile broadband subscriptions. In terms of prices, the affordability target for mobile broadband was achieved in 2022 with a 1.98% share of the country's monthly GNI per capita, while fixed broadband slightly decreased, but it is still way above the target of 2% share of monthly income. Now, for both fixed and mobile broadband speed, it generally shows an increasing or improving trend. In the discussion paper, we also provide additional indicators from the 2022 GSMA Mobile Connectivity Index. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we discuss the recent initiatives, it is important to acknowledge that the Philippines has experimented with different approaches to universal access in telecommunications. So previous efforts by the government involved a mix of public investment and the imposition of service obligations, which are and these are discussed in a 2021 paper by Albert and others. From the 1980s to 2000s, the government took out loans for various programs to promote universal access. So these include the National Telephone Program, the Regional Telecommunications Development Project, and the Telepono sa Barangay Program. The general assessment is that these projects were not able to improve telephone services in the long term, and which could have been the foundation for universal broadband. Now, another strategy was called the Service Area Scheme. So when competition was introduced in cellular mobile services and international gateway facilities, the companies were required to provide a minimum number of local exchange lines or public calling offices through internal cross-subsidization. But because of declining income from foreign exchange services, a lower demand for local exchange in rural areas, and the proliferation of mobile telephony, the implementation of the obligations, the universal service obligations became unsustainable. And then finally, one project specific to broadband, which was supposed to provide internet access to all government offices, was the National Broadband Network. We all know that this was mired in controversy and was eventually canceled. Next slide, please. So what are the recent initiatives? So for 2 decades since the Philippines first connected to the internet in 1994 and the passage of RA 7925 in 1995, that is the Telecom Policy Act, there was no significant policy directive relating to broadband. Nevertheless, there have been significant policy and regulatory reforms in the last 10 years. So the institutional and governance framework was strengthened with the creation of the Department of Information and Communications Technology in 2016 and the release of a National Broadband Plan in 2017. And then other reforms since then have been a mix of competition, liberalization, and facilitation measures. So a new license was awarded in 2019 to break up the duopoly in the mobile market. And then in 2021, access to satellite services was liberalized. And then in 2022, the Public Service Act was amended, removing equity restrictions in industries that are considered services but not utilities. And then in terms of facilitation measures, the DICT's Common Tower Policy was released in 2020, which set the guidelines on the sharing of passive tower infrastructure for macrocell sites. And then there were also joint issuances by multiple agencies to rationalize the process and requirements for granting permits. And then last year, the President issued an executive order to streamline the requirements for constructing telecommunications and internet infrastructure. Now, the development plan identified other reforms. In its legislative agenda, it includes the institutionalizing the National Broadband Program and also amending the National Building Code to ensure that buildings can be equipped with quality and reliable ICT services. And the administration will also push for the Open Access in Data Transmission Bill to liberalize the building of networks and access to spectrum, particularly for rural and geographically disadvantaged areas in the country. I believe the other speakers will talk about the substitute bill, which is called the Konektadong Pinoy. And also, just to mention that there was a proposed Rural Wired Connectivity Development Act submitted in the 18th Congress, which sought to incentivize local ISPs to provide connectivity in rural areas by offering tax benefits based on the number of subscribers connected. So it has to be refiled. Okay, so next slide, please. I will stop here and then hand over the presentation to Queen Oren, who will now talk about the specific programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Manette. The National Broadband Plan. I want to highlight the National Broadband Plan, which the DICT released in 2017. It is the key document that outlines the strategies to achieve universal, faster, and affordable internet access. The vision of the National Broadband Plan is to have a resilient, comfortable and vibrant life for all, enabled by pervasive, inclusive, and affordable trusted broadband internet access. It has identified 3 main strategies: policy and regulation reforms in telecommunications or ICT, specifically administrative reforms and reforms to increase competition and market entry, government investment in broadband infrastructure to complement the existing infrastructure of telcos, and support on stimulation of broadband demand to increase broadband take-up rate. Interventions to stimulate demand will focus on local content development and promotion, conduct of capacity building and information outreach programs, and introduction of incentives to broadband users. Next slide, please. According to Albert et al. 2021, prior to 2016, there was hardly any government-supported broadband infrastructure. Since then, the DICT has been investing in the Philippine Integrated Infrastructure. The DICT has been investing in and this is under the National Broadband Plan. The National Broadband Program is composed of cable landing stations, national fiber backbone, accelerated building of towers and fiber to interconnect national and local government agencies, and provide provincial and city broadband and satellite overlay. And we hope that ASec Varilla will update us on the status of this program. Next slide, please. Infrastructure sharing is a key strategy to lower the cost of deploying broadband. Generally, infrastructure can be shared by entities within the same sector. The Common Tower Policy, released in May 2020, set the policy guidelines on the sharing of passive telecommunications tower infrastructure for macro cell sites. Independent tower firms were mandated to lease their towers to telecommunication carriers, value-added service providers, and ICT service providers. Another case of infrastructure sharing is between two sectors, for example, electricity and ICT. One practical way to expand broadband coverage is to leverage the use of existing utility poles of electricity distribution facilities, which can help save on civil works. While the distribution utilities and telecommunications companies both have the incentive to go into infrastructure sharing agreements or arrangements, issues have been raised, for example, with respect to rental rates set. Comprehensive guidelines are needed to cover systems interconnection and integration model standards, fee structure for interconnections, dispute resolutions, and repository of available infrastructure, and infrastructure sharing regime. According to UNESCAP, the success of cross-sector infrastructure sharing is highly influenced by the level of cooperation and collaboration among partners and strengthened by a conducive regulatory framework. Dr. Kris Francisco will talk about infrastructure sharing issues later on. Next slide, please. Next, we'll look at specific programs that provide community and institutional broadband access. Next slide, please. The free Wi-Fi internet access in public places was a program initiated by the DOST Information and Communications Technology Office in 2015 and transferred to the DICT in 2016 when it was created through RA 10844. The program was institutionalized in the Free Internet Access in Public Places Act in 2017. According to the law, free internet access will be provided in public places such as government hospital, healthcare centers, libraries, parks, schools, among others. The minimum speed must be at least 2 Mbps per users or as prescribed by the NPP, whichever is higher. It is funded from the spectrum users fees collected by the NTC and other sources to be identified by the DBM. As of May 2024, there were 12,000 live sites all over the country. As the table shows, the number has been fluctuating. In our report, we also have another table showing that NCR in regions 4B, 5, and 9 have the highest number of live sites per city or municipality, while regions 12, 8, and BARM have the fewest, considering their respective population and number of cities or municipalities. The free Wi-Fi project has experienced implementation issues relating in a low performance rate since the program started. The issues were identified by COA and documented by the Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department of the House of Representatives. It was observed that the disbursement rate was low, which meant that project completion was delayed or bidded out near the end of the year. Identified reasons for delays or suspensions of contracts include the lack of permits from LGUs, followed by delayed issuances or of suppliers' co-location, lack of terminal points, armed conflict in Mindanao, lack of joint pole agreement, and change order of other sites. The partnership of the DICT and United Nations Development to implement a free Wi-Fi project was also called out. Under the law, the DICT should be the lead implementing agency to oversee the implementation of the project, and the implementing agencies are supposed to be government agencies. COA noted that the partnership with UNDP was also impractical since UNDP's contracted suppliers could not provide timely delivery of services. The delayed implementation, non-activation, deactivation, and poor connectivity of sites were also attributed to insufficient or lack of planning, network monitoring system, and impact assessment. Due to the backlog of the government in establishing free internet access sites in public places, Senate Resolution number 59 was filed in the 19th Congress seeking to review the implementation of RA 10929 as well as the Open Distance Learning Act. Next slide, please. Apart from the DICT, other agencies are also bridging the digital divide through the use of new technologies. The Philippine Space Agency aims to use emerging space technologies, particularly in GIDA, where fiber connection is not available or feasible. Through its incentivized project, the agency invited satellite internet providers to test deploy their products and services in remote and rural areas in the country to test viability towards commercial service. It also installed Starlink in public schools and government offices in various areas. PhilSat also previously collaborated with DOST-STI and Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas in 2022 by providing satellite internet services to rural banks in Batangas. The DICT's Broadband ng Masa program focuses on providing internet connectivity in GIDA or geographical and isolated disadvantaged areas using satellite technology. The DICT tapped Starlink with funding drawn from the free Wi-Fi program in 2022. Another company, Astranis, signed a deal with a local ISP to provide 2 dedicated satellite internet services in the Philippines via micro-geo satellites, which can connect up to 10 million people and 30,000 barangays. These projects are relatively new, so we don't have any information yet on the performance of these interventions. It would also be helpful to understand how these programs complement each other. Next slide, please. Tech4Ed is managed by the DICT's ICT Literacy and Competency Development Bureau. It aims to provide connectivity, ICT equipment, learning resources, and e-government services to underserved communities. DICT provides digital platform, equipment, and internet subject to availability of funds, while partner organizations typically provide equipment, space, and personnel. In partnership with ITU, the program was upgraded into Tech4Ed Digital Transformation Center, DTC project, transforming Tech4Ed centers to become more sustainable by being self-sustaining centers, providing ICT-enabled services and opportunities for ICT skills development for farmers, MSMEs, students, and citizens. The DTCs focus more fully in providing training and digital literacy besides providing physical facilities that the Tech4Ed centers mainly provide. The creation of Tech4Ed centers depends on the availability of partner organizations or institutions that could provide resources. Non-operational Tech4Ed centers ceased to operate due to the COVID-19 pandemic, or discontinuity of funding and support from partner organizations or natural calamities. Region 5, 3, 4A, 4B, and 6 have the highest number of Tech 4 Ed centers. Many centers are not operational, particularly in regions 4A, 4B, 10, 7, and 8. Over 70% of Tech 4 Ed centers in regions 12, BARM, CAR are operational. However, many of them do not have internet access. Operational centers within these regions can focus on providing internet access to accommodate households without internet at home. Next slide, please. In terms of initiatives to encourage broadband adoption, we have identified various government programs, but due to limitation of this study, we did not examine these in detail. Examples of these programs include e-government, where the DICT e-government priority projects are eGovPH app, eLGU, eGov Cloud, eTravel, eGovPay, eReport, and eReport. The Digital Government Master Plan will also serve as the overarching framework to transform public administration and create a digitally enabled government delivering efficient, fast, quality services through the integration of platforms and services, technologies, skilled workforce, and ICT infrastructure. DepEd continues to implement its computerization program, providing public schools with computer equipment and internet. As of school year 2020 to 2021, over 80% of public schools have functional computers and more than 60% have internet access. In October 2023, the DepEd Digital Education 2028 was launched to provide free Wi-Fi in schools where more than 2,000 were given satellite internet connectivity. In terms of business processes, PhilHealth also utilizes e-claims system, while the DOH, PhilHealth, and DICT also released a joint administrative order to mandate all healthcare providers to comply with the standard conformance and interoperability validation to ensure the interoperability of health-related data. The proposed National E-Health System and Services Act was previously approved by the House of Representatives and was transmitted to the Senate in 2021. However, no action was taken until the end of the 18th Congress. Similar bills were introduced and are still pending in the 19th Congress. Telemedicine is one of the main internet applications in health. The Department of Health and the National Privacy Commission released a memorandum circular to guide healthcare providers, telemedicine service providers, and patients in implementing telemedicine services. This include encouraging healthcare providers to subscribe to DOH telemedicine partners and use electronic medical records and e-prescriptions. In 2022, the DOH expressed its plans to create telehealth services nationwide to decongest health facilities and extend health services to underserved and unserved areas in the country. And to enhance connectivity in some rural areas in the Philippines, the DOST has created the robust and rapidly deployable GSM-based stations and backhaul for emergency responses as an alternative channels to ensure communication remains intact during emergencies or disasters. The Philippine rural communities also employ signal repeaters, directive antennas, and improvised towers. Additionally, private entities have introduced community cellular networks and mobile phone services in rural areas, mirroring initiatives seen in various countries. And lastly, the Cyber for Peace initiative was an outreach program or activity that leveraged the Army's existing capacities and partnerships with the local government units, providing them with assistance in repairing and maintaining ICT equipment, providing them with electricity, and also training on digital literacy and cybersecurity. Like many other countries, digital connectivity is high on the policy agenda. There have been missed opportunities to achieve universal access in basic telecommunications and to build national broadband network. We are now playing catching up. Significant progress has been made in recent years, but further reforms and better interventions are still necessary to make broadband pervasive, inclusive, and affordable. Based on the reviews of these policies and strategies, the following areas could be improved. Next slide, please. The Free Internet Access in Public Places Act requires preparation of annual reports on the status of the program and recommend the policy needed to implement the law effectively. The law further requires DICT to give information on the performance, quality, and compliance with a minimum standard on the free public internet access points. For FWFA and other government programs discussed, a robust monitoring and evaluation system must be developed and strengthened if such a system already exists. There is also a need to address implementation issues and revisit the designs of the program. For the free Wi-Fi, there has been in place for more than 5 years now, is due for an evaluation. There might be a need to revisit the design of the program to ensure that the country's flagship universal access program will focus or fulfill its objectives. According to COA, for example, the FWFA program should rethink how much the budget would be given to public places and SUCs, which would yield better social and economic outcomes. An alternative mechanism might be more suitable while ensuring transparency and accountability. A mix of approaches adapted to the specific demands and unique requirements of unserved and underserved communities could also be explored. The assessment and possible redesign must not only focus on ensuring effective implementation, but also to look at the sustainability of the programs in the medium to long term. Although the government has stepped in to provide UAS, the development of broadband in the country is still very much private sector-led. Ensuring the minimum and advertised internet speed and services standards are maintained throughout the country is also essential. There is also a need to collaborate with the ISPs, particularly telcos and ISPs providing internet services, as well as satellite service providers for mapping of the broadband nationwide. Currently, the data on mobile broadband are available, but these are usually crowdsourced data. Government initiatives on digital connectivity should ultimately aim towards achieving universal and meaningful connectivity. Since we did not study the programs in detail, these recommendations are focused on better understanding the profile, needs, and behaviors of users so that more usable digital services and applications can be developed and demand-side interventions can be tailored to the needs of the community. As recommended by Tabuga and Caballero, the National ICT Household Survey should include social-demographic profiles such as individuals, employment status, income, and ICT skills, as well as household income to better understand the factors that may affect internet adoption and non-adoption. Further, probing on the reasons for non-adoption, particularly for those who answer that they do not need the internet, is needed to identify issues that could be addressed by policies. Digital readiness surveys at the community level, surveys for MSMEs on how they use digital tools, and gender dimensions should be also incorporated in surveys so that we can have more information on the extent of the digital divide. Other recommendations related to cross-sectoral issues will be discussed by Dr. Kris Francisco.
Thank you so much, Queen. Okay, so let me just elaborate on infrastructure sharing because this is a really, really good strategy. This is a cost-effective strategy that is highly relevant for financially constrained economies like ours. Now, infrastructure sharing is a supply-side strategy. The idea is to share the real property fixed assets among either within the telecommunication sector or among different sectors of the economy, like, for example, the electricity sector or the telecoms company can partner with the transport sector. Now, infrastructure sharing has been around since the 1800s. This has been utilized to expand the connections of the telegraphs or the telephone in the US and has been adapted since. But the development of the microwave technology for mobile network has dampened the need for infrastructure sharing, although the recent decades has seen the increase in demand for internet connection and therefore the demand for higher bandwidth. And this has pushed for the development of the fiber technology. And the fiber technology requires the strategy that was used for telephone and telegraph. And so this has again reignited the need for infrastructure sharing. Kaya nandito tayo ulit ngayon. So infrastructure sharing is attractive because the partnership is usually mutually beneficial. So if you are a newcomer in the telecom market, it's advantages for you because you're able, instead of building your own infrastructure, you're able to utilize the existing network corridors and physical infrastructure of other companies. And this would substantially reduce the initial cost of your setup. So the barrier to entry to enter the market has been reduced. And this would also allow you to expand your reach more rapidly. For the infrastructure owner, this is a good strategy because it allows them to monetize the latent value of their physical infrastructure, which from which the revenues they can use either to improve their existing infrastructure or build another one. And for both of them, because two sectors or two companies are using the physical infrastructure, so they get to share the maintenance cost. So lower maintenance cost in the long run. Next slide, please. Now, infrastructure sharing can be done either within the sector, within the telecommunication sector, or cross-sector infrastructure sharing. The intra-sector infrastructure sharing, however, is viewed as a bottleneck. It's a bottleneck in the telecom sector that usually leads to market dominance, especially if you have market players that have a vertically integrated structure wherein they are the ones who build their infrastructure. So they spend a lot for their infrastructure. So it is understandable that they are unwilling to provide access or to share access to their competitors. And if they do so, they do it in an unfavorable terms. So for regulators and policymakers, the cross-sector infrastructure sharing is more advantageous, more feasible. This is because the core business of the company involved or the organization involved is usually not on telecoms. So because of this, they are considered a neutral market participant, wherein their concern is to maximize the profit that they get from their physical infrastructure. And so even without mandate, they are keen on providing discriminatory access to telecommunications companies wanting to share the infrastructure with them. So cross-sector infrastructure sharing usually occurs between the transport sector and the telecom sector, or the electricity sector and the telecommunications sector. Now, the expected outcome from infrastructure sharing is, of course, the lower setup cost for operators. And this has been proven in the literature. A lot of studies in the European Union, centering on the European Union, has shown that this has indeed lowered the cost for operators, and this has led to higher market competition and eventually translated to lower prices for consumers. Next slide, please. Now, when talking about infrastructure sharing, it is relevant to define what is passive and active infrastructure, because not all parts of the infrastructure can be shared. An infrastructure owner can share part of its physical structures without having to affect its core operations. So what is usually shared is the non-electronic parts. That is the passive infrastructure, the mast, the ducts, the buildings, the towers, poles, and sometimes the part of the fiber network that is still unutilized. So the active infrastructure is commonly parang not part of the infrastructure sharing. These are used for the main activity. So these are the electronic components, transmission system, radio access, feeder cables, and etc. Next slide, please. Now, the reason why infrastructure sharing is very, very important and a core strategy in many developing and developed countries is because passive infrastructure expenditure for the passive infrastructure constitutes 70 to 80% of the overall cost of investment in fixed access telecom networks. And according to the study, according to this paper of the Broadband Commission, it would take around 15 years for a telecom company to recover that investment cost. So infrastructure sharing is really a cost-effective measure in expanding the broadband network. And it's relevant both for wired technology and mobile technology, because expansion is expensive for both types of connection. So we know that wired technology can help deliver more reliable and better quality connection because it gives us it can carry higher bandwidth. But the cost of deployment is also too high. Civil works constitute 75% of the total cost, plus issues with right-of-ways, numerous permits and clearances that needs to be approved before they can build their infrastructure. The same goes with wireless or mobile technology. The expansion of cellular towers is also expensive. It consumes up to 50% of capital, and it's expensive to maintain. It consumes up to 60% of operation costs of mobile carriers. So next slide, please. Now, the government has a good appreciation on the value of infrastructure sharing. It's actually embedded in our National Broadband Plan. Facilitating infrastructure sharing is one of the outlined strategies to mobilize and engage public and private sectors. In fact, the government specified that it's going to open its existing facilities to market players to encourage more competition in the market. So they specified to share the DICT's towers, the NGCP's fiber cores, and existing infrastructure such as roads, electricity poles, etc., just to reduce the cost related to civil works. Because as I've mentioned, civil works cost is very, very high. So parang it is a deterrent for entry for a lot of market participants. And the government also pledged to provide guidelines on the system's interconnection and integration models and standards, interconnection fee, dispute resolution, repository of available infrastructure, and infrastructure sharing regime. Although we have not yet seen these guidelines, probably ASec, Varilla could also update us on this, because I think this is a very important part of the implementation of infrastructure sharing. Next slide, please. Now, based on our search, these are the actual steps taken by the government so far, which is related to infrastructure sharing. So in 2020, the DICT released the department circular that contains guidelines on the co-location and sharing of passive telecommunications tower infrastructure for macro cell sites. So in here, we are looking at intra-sector sharing of towers among telecommunications companies themselves. And then in 2021, there was a joint memorandum circular that aims to streamline the processes related to securing permits, licenses, authorizations of passive telecom infrastructure to accelerate the rollout of projects. Next slide, please. There are also existing provisions that can be leveraged for broadband expansion. One cost-effective measure to expand the fiber connections is through aerial cables that can be attached to the electric utility poles of electricity companies. And so even before crafting our national broadband plan, the EPIRA law already allowed the distribution utilities to engage directly or indirectly in any businesses undertaking that would maximize the use of their assets. This means that they can rent their physical infrastructure. In 2010, the ERC also set the rules governing the submission, evaluation, and approval of these properties of the use. And then by 2018, the National Electrification Administration also released the pole guidelines for joint pole agreement and pole rental rates. Next slide, please. Now, of course, because we are dealing with multiple sectors who have multiple incentives to go into the sharing agreement and multiple priorities, it's expected that some issues will arise. Therefore, it's very, very important to have a comprehensive and very clear guidelines. So these are some of the issues that we found. There was a conflict between the Federation of International Cable TV and Telecommunications Association and the National Electrification Administration, which is representing the distribution utilities, about the rental charge. The Association of Telecommunication companies view the charge as too high, while the distribution utilities thinks that the charge is just fair. I think the issue arises because the other party was not consulted when they set the pole rental charges. So that is one thing. And then another issue is the proliferation of unlicensed telecommunication companies that have joint pole agreements with electric cooperatives, which was also raised by FICTA. And they said that this has affected the operation of their members in the rural areas. Next slide, please. So let me just point out that this experience of the Philippines is not unique. So this has also been experienced in the United States, issues regarding pole attachment. So communication companies in the US argue that pole attachment rates hinder their broadband deployment in rural areas. So the rates were, the issue of the high rate was used as an excuse for the low broadband deployment rate in rural areas. But electric cooperatives argue that they have different priorities. Communication companies are more profit driven. Therefore, it's not really the rates that are deterring them from expanding their reach. It's actually the low population density, the high capital costs, and high operating expenses in those rural areas that are constraining them or discouraging them to expand in these areas. And as opposed to electric cooperatives, wherein they really have that mandate to provide reliable and safe electricity services, regardless of the profitability, regardless of the remoteness of the area. So what we are seeing here is that in crafting our policy, it's also important to identify and have an appreciation of the differences in priorities of the sectors involved. Because as I've mentioned, because we are dealing with multiple sectors, we have to come up with a regulatory framework that would take into consideration all of these factors. Next slide, please. So as mentioned by Mimi earlier, and I will mention it again, according to a paper of UNESCAP released in 2021, the success of this very good strategy, this infrastructure sharing strategy, relies heavily on the cooperation and collaboration among sectors, and that should be strengthened by a conducive policy framework that would allow them to really behave collaboratively. So far, what we have, from what I've read from the guidelines that was set by the ERC and NEA, it was written in such a way that the parties are induced to behave independently, not really collaboratively. And so I would like to end my presentation by presenting this set of principles that are based on international best practices published by the Communications Regulators Association of Southern Africa in collaboration with the International Telecommunications Union. And these are the important principles that emerge as very, very important in crafting the regulatory framework for infrastructure sharing. So number one, inclusive regulatory framework. To attract cooperation and investment, as well as to avoid confusion for potential participants, regulations must be clear, transparent, and should cover all aspects and all sectors involved in the sharing agreement. So I think this is something that we must improve on. So it must cover all sectors in the sharing agreement and not just one party. The second one is non-selective infrastructure sharing. All types of sharing must be permitted as long as it does not go against the competition regulation policies. The third one is the right to request to share infrastructure based on government mandate. So it is the government's role to identify the type of infrastructure allowed for sharing, as well as the concerned operator. The government must also develop a standard process that is time-bound, and that applies to all sectors involved. The next one is obliging sector participants to negotiate sharing their infrastructure within reasonable time frame. This means that government should come up with guidelines related to a standard process about either accepting or rejecting requests. This can help reduce disputes in the future. The next one is to define guidelines on how pricing should be set. From the experience of other countries and from what I've seen based on my research, government usually oblige market participants or market operators, especially those with significant market power, to publish their reference offer. Next one is develop an efficient process to encourage infrastructure sharing. The approval of requests should be very timely and effective, and there should be a maximum time limit for every step of the process. It's also important to involve stakeholders in designing this process. The next one is dispute resolution. The dispute resolution should be documented, timely, and should apply cross-sectoral. It's important to involve stakeholders in designing as well as in reviewing the process. And last is consistency with the National Broadband Plan and future technologies. So the regulatory framework for infrastructure sharing should, of course, complement the National Broadband Plan, and it should be technology neutral to account for future developments in technology. So I will end my presentation here, but I hope that this these are the principles that we could incorporate in our regulatory framework or in our regulations so that we may be able to foster infrastructure sharing and utilize it, leverage it to expand our broadband reach. Maraming salamat po.
Great. Excellent presentations from our resource speakers, Dr. Ramonette, Dr. Kris, and Ms. Mimi. We'll talk more about their presentation later on during the Q&A open forum. For our audience participants, let me remind you again, you can use the Q&A box via Zoom for your questions. And for those joining us via Facebook Live, use the comment section for your comments, questions, and even insights. Okay, so to enrich our discussions, we have invited esteemed discussants to give their insights. Allow me to introduce our first reactor, Mr. Naoto Kanehira. So Mr. Naoto joined the World Bank in 2010 and has held corporate roles on strategy, organization, budget, and human resources and operational roles in Europe, Asia, and Africa, supporting technology, entrepreneurship, productivity, and promoting science, technology, and innovation partnerships and digital cooperation through UN, OECD, and G20 countries. Prior to the World Bank, he co-founded a mobile internet startup in the late 1990s in Japan, worked at McKinsey & Company, advising on digital transformation, and researched computer science and organizational behavior at MIT Media Laboratory. Mr. Naoto holds an MPA from Harvard University and a Master of Science degree from MIT. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Mr. Naoto Kanehira. Mr. Naoto, you can start your presentation.
Sorry, I should do my screen sharing my computer, is that correct?
Yes, please.
Yeah, let me open my presentation and do the screen sharing from here. Hope it works. And everyone see my presentation on screen?
Very clear from our end.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again, Sony, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank PIDS for organizing this webinar on such an important topic on universal broadband. I'd like to also thank the authors team, Ramonette, Dr. Kris and Queen, for the informative publication and the excellent presentations. And also to my fellow discussant, Assistant Secretary Philippe, for our continuous collaboration. Making broadband universal is among top priorities in the work of the World Bank in the Philippines. I'd like to contribute to today's discussion by adding some analysis from our recent policy note, which we published in January, and also Dr. Orbeta kindly mentioned in his opening remarks today. So I'll start with the topic of digital divide. Ramonette presented the poor access and high cost of internet. These result in inequity in access, and this is urgent because if unaddressed, digital divide can grow into broader development divides. The first graph I show here show broadband access by income quintiles. This comes from PSA's annual poverty indicator survey data. The expansion of access gap is alarming. The households with higher income quintiles significantly improved access to broadband, while the poorer population haven't. Access gap between the top 2 income quintiles and the bottom 2 income quintiles was 26% in 2019, and it expanded to 42% in 2022. The second graph here compares various goods and services with household penetration in the x-axis in the graph, and the changes in access gap over the 3 years. between the rich and the poor in y-axis. It is very natural to see there's an upward trend, meaning as more people adopt goods and services, prices tend to go down, making them more affordable by lower income households. Governments play its role in ensuring equitable universal access to essential services, successfully done, for example, for electricity or safe drinking water. We see the landline telephone on the far left and the cell phones on the far right. And this we call disruption or leapfrogging. Broadband internet is on the bottom left, and this is an outlier. We don't see a pattern like this in any other public or private goods or services. With this trend continuing, there's a huge risk. Many services can go digital, but without narrowing the digital access gap, digitalization may not contribute to reducing poverty by any means. And an important characteristics of the internet inequity in this country is visible in these maps. These maps generated from Ookla speed test results show how low-speed internet is spread on the top with the white lights, and the high-speed internet shown on the bottom maps with the blue lights. There are fixed and mobile broadband shown differently. So here in the Philippines, both low-speed and high-speed internet is fairly pervasive actually. While for the majority of the household, even low-speed fixed internet is not affordable. What this means is that private backbone networks typically reach most part of the country, but last mile networks struggle. An elaboration on cross-sector sharing of access networks by Dr. Kris points to the exact challenge showing in these slides. There are always tensions involved between the competition and cooperation, the extent with which operators within and across utility sectors compete or cooperate. I'd like to also highlight the weak competition within data transmission sector in the Philippines. Philippines is the most concentrated, most profitable, and least invested broadband market in the region. For the mobile, concentration is obvious. The Philippines is the only country with the top 2 operators with 90% market share as of 2022. And the Philippines is the only country with the top 2 operators earning profit above 50% as measured by earning before income taxes and depreciation and amortization, EBITDA. On investment, number of mobile towers per population is by far the lowest in ASEAN, except for Singapore, where cell sites are built with buildings but not towers. The bottom chart shows investments in telecom infrastructure and resulting penetration of the internet over time. For the Philippines, from the national accounts, we can see telecom infrastructure investment or gross capital formation in telecommunications gradually declining from 0.64% of GDP in 2018 to 0.44% of GDP in 2022. From ITU data, we see around 100 low and middle income countries in the world invested at least 1% of GDP for at least 1 year over the last 15 years, and the Philippines haven't done it. So what needs to be done? Dr. Ramonette presented a very useful framework of supply and demand factors and the different government roles as enabler, facilitator, and provider. The first thing to do, we believe, is to fix the supply side market failures by removing barriers to entry, competition, and investments, managing spectrum better, and also clarifying basic infrastructure sharing policy framework. It's the Conectadon Pinoy Act, formerly known as Open Access in Data Transmission Act, to do this job, and we fully support this policy reform. For those of you interested, we did in-depth analysis in our recent publication. I will show the link at the end of my presentation. But more needs to be done through government support. The telecom industry, through PSAC, agrees on this point we make, not on other points we make. And they made ambitious recommendations to the president in April. We would say it's good if it's doable, but we need to see the 60 billion pesos annually to be allocated to DICT may sound a blessing and or headache to our dear friend ASec Philip. We should discuss how we could make it doable. It will be useful to consider differentiated public-private approaches towards universal connectivity. So this diagram is a fairly standard conceptual framework when designing interventions for connectivity infrastructure rollout. It uses real data from the Philippines with the x-axis along the country's landmass by 1,400 municipalities from high to low population density. And the y-axis with cumulative population, cumulative broadband coverage or axis, and of which the fixed broadband. This comes from 2020 census, and at that point, fixed broadband reached 20% households. Broadband, including mobile internet, reached 56% of the household, with steep curve in urban centers, but flattering into less populated areas that you see. We divide notionally the Philippines into 4 regional segments. So first and second segments, urban and peri-urban areas. These areas host around 60% of the country's population. And these areas could be served by well-functioning and competitive markets. The third segment, the rural areas, hosts up to 90% of the cumulative population. Connectivity is largely limited to mobile in these areas, or fixed wireless, but not fixed wired connectivity. These areas should benefit more from both market reforms and complementary public investments to crowd in private investments and expand commercial sustainability frontier for affordable infrastructure deployment. In areas with latent demands for bandwidth from the broadband internet, public facilities such as schools, health centers, local government offices can be anchor tenancy for private operators. The fourth area, far-flung areas, hosts the last 10% of the population. The government's missionary interventions may be necessary, but it needs to be done in economically viable, fiscally sustainable, and scalable manners, which is a challenge. And however, in combining private and public approaches to make internet universal, I must say the government still lacks sufficient policy options for fiscal space. If government invests more public resources in broadband access, the resource has to come from either someone paying more taxes or the government cutting expenditure elsewhere. In most other countries, such resource comes from telecom operators, generating what is called government spectrum revenue. In the Philippines, the total spectrum user fees, or SUS, almost tripled in 5 years, from 2.4 billion pesos in 2017 to 6.7 billion pesos in 2022. And of course, operators complain about it. But in nominal terms, as a percentage of total government revenue, this has been almost nothing. Around 0.1% of the government revenue, which is around 7 times lower than the average of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. And spectrum is not the only fiscal channel from telco operators to the government. There are direct and indirect taxes as well. 2 other main channels: a contribution to what is called universal service funds and the corporate income taxes. Compared with the regional peers, the Philippines collects roughly half or less of the operator's revenue, provided that the Philippines doesn't have the universal service funds. And beyond payment from operators to the government, there is effectively no obligation to the top operators to expand rural coverage through their services. Typically, such obligations are attached to issuance of or renewal of operators' licenses, and assignment of the spectrum bands. But in the Philippines, licenses have been given with legislative franchise and haven't been renewed with any opportunity to attach coverage obligation. The only exception here is veto. I agree with all of the recommendations made by the PIDS authors, including on cross-sectoral infrastructure sharing, leveraging satellite, revisiting design and implementation of various DICT and other department programs, and mapping and data collection mechanisms for facilitation and monitoring. The only one thing that I would add is to also think about revenue side, not just the expenditure side of the universal access policy mix. And it has to be done in ways compatible with the industry's long-term interests, which should be connecting all Filipinos and harnessing digital transformation opportunities for inclusive economic growth. So I would like to end my comments here by reiterating the World Bank's commitment to work with all of you on policy analysis, on reforms, and public and private investments to bridge the digital divide and advance digital transformation in the Philippines. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate and looking forward to the discussions later.
All right, that is great, Mr. Naoto. We'll again hear from you during the open forum. Now we go to our second discussant, Engineer Philip A. Varilla, Assistant Secretary, Infrastructure Management, Department of Information and Communications Technology. ASec Varilla is a seasoned professional electronics engineer and a ASEAN engineer with over 34 years of experience in telecommunications or ICT. Appointed in August 2022, he supervises the Broadband Universal program, including free Wi-Fi for all and the National Broadband Program. He also oversees the Infrastructure Management Bureau of the ICT and chairs the DICT Bids and Awards Committee. ASec Varilla represents the ICT in various interagency committees, such as NEDA Infocom and the Philippine Space Council. He chaired Sub-Planning Committee on Digital Infrastructure in the Philippines, PDP 23 to 28, and leads the CIO Forum. Previously, he directed the Infrastructure Management Bureau and held executive positions managing ICT projects and policies. ASec Varilla has received numerous awards for his service and holds a master's degree in industrial engineering and management and a bachelor's in electronics and communications engineering from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. You now have the virtual floor, ASec Varilla.
Thank you for your kind introduction. And I would like to thank PIDS, particularly the authors, Ramonette, Serafica, Kris Francisco, and Oren, for the research they made on making Broadband Universal, review of Philippine Policies and Strategies. And also, I would like to thank PIDS for holding this webinar in this year's National ICT Month. In general, I actually like the arrangement of the report, starting from some facts on ICT and broadband and providing comments afterwards. Similarly, my comments and inputs will follow the research paper and the presentation made by the authors. I have taken note of the references made, especially the National ICT Household Survey, which was done in 2019, which is actually being updated right now. The paper from FCC related to the identification of broadband as to whether it is downstream and upstream, and how what would be the good throughput under these two streams. And given the speeds for various applications, 10 to 100 Mbps should be targeted as it would allow access to substantial services and application using telemedicine, telecommuting, teleeducation, and broadcast video and other video services. We have also taken note of the Household Broadband Guide from USFCC, in that it gives us a reference on the requirement of the household users classified into basic, medium, and advanced with corresponding bandwidth throughputs. I agree that the choice of technology significantly affects the cost of broadband deployment. If I may, just to comment that the sentence on Leo is misplaced and may not be accurate. LEOs can provide sufficient capacity and coverage, although it remains to be more costly than the other technologies. May I also clarify that should LEO satellite operators fail to launch more satellites while they aggressively onboard users in their systems, capacity issue will arise. And I agree with the rest of the research on the use of different technologies on depending on their uses, whether it's 3G, 4G, 5G, fixed wireless broadband, and fiber. 4G deployment is good, especially in rural areas. And 5G deployment can continue also, especially in targeted areas that require more capacity, either because of multiple users or the broadband application or service require it. I also note that the impact of broadband, as stated in the study, would increase GDP growth, to as much as 1.5%. And an updated study on this economic impact of broadband has to be made, either as part of the NBP 2.0 or a separate study. The DICT is now processing inputs from various stakeholders for the drafting and finalization of NBP 2.0, or the second version of the National Broadband Plan. We have noted the distinction of universal access, or UA, to universal service, or US, and the move of other countries to combine the two to make it universal access and service. And I agree that countries should aim for both UA and US. In rural areas, it will be difficult to aim for US because of cost and affordability of the services, and the phased approach per area should be pursued from universal access to universal service. I also noticed that on table 3, if you can include Wi-Fi access points in the availability part of the universal access. I hope you can also include something on internet access, since most, if not all, descriptors of universal access and universal service are based on telephone-based services. I agree that internet is now an essential tool for inclusive and sustainable development, and government intervention through a proactive national broadband strategy should be pursued. Deployment should be pursued to increase coverage. Adoption should be intensified to increase service uptake, and that usage also will be delivered and receive, and the benefits of this different applications such as e-commerce, telehealth, and teleeducation can be absorbed by our people. The initial government intervention like supply side promotion and competition regulation, um, uh, they are very much noted, and we can also work for universalization to ensure widespread coverage and use. As a government enabler, lowering barriers to entry and removing restrictions to supply services, and promote um, content is they are important in getting our people use broadband services. We need to reduce cost of the network, expand the network, and reduce regulatory burden. And we need to accelerate the network rollout. The government continues to provide ICT and broadband services in the not so profitable areas, even rural areas. And I'm glad that Table 4 considers a more recent study on these things. On supply side approaches, I agree with the continuation of government, whether national or local, and the private sector partnership to deploy connectivity in rural areas. Infrastructure sharing, both passive and active, can reduce costs up to 70%, as mentioned in the study. The government can also participate in the infrastructure sharing initiative because it has digital infrastructure that can be shared. Cross-sector sharing on passive infrastructure can really result in large cost savings. The DICT has actually has been meeting with the Department of Public Works and Highways and in coming up with a guidelines, with some guidelines on the development of this cross-sector sharing. This will include infrastructure for electricity, telecommunications, water, and sewerage. Government will have to be clear on what type of infrastructure will be shared and who will be the concerned operators. I also like the discussions presented in the ownership models. Funding models and ownership models are related and intertwined. In our consultations, we came across different models, such as purely funded by the LGU. And so because there are some LGUs that are actually putting up some digital infrastructure in their own locality. There are some LGUs that are partnering with the private sector in rolling out this digital infrastructure. Some LGUs are also looking at the national government to partner with them and partner with another entity, from the private sector to help in the development of the digital infrastructure. Of course, the national government agencies also partner with other with the private sector. There are some projects that are funded purely by national government agencies, while there are also projects that are funded by the private sector, either unilaterally or in partnership with another telecom companies or even non-government organizations. On spectrum pricing and sharing, I agree that spectrum should be awarded to those who will use it effectively and efficiently. and that it would benefit the society. Spectrum pricing should be clear and allow or encourage the deployment of more broadband infrastructure. The spectrum management policy framework should be formulated to have fair computation and supports adaptability to technological advancements, maximizes efficient use of limited spectrum resource. Spectrum sharing is something that can also help us use the spectrum more efficiently. This should be part of the spectrum management policy framework. On demand side approaches, I agree with the suggestions such as subsidies, demand aggregation, education and training, and enhancing privacy and security to improve public confidence in broadband service, as well as provide relevant content and applications such as on education, public health, media, entertainment, and government services. On subsidies, we have taken note of the affordable connectivity program of USA, and we're actually thinking of a similar project under the Free Public Internet Access Program, wherein poor and qualified families in unserved areas can be provided access to broadband services in addition to other demand-side approaches and supply-side approaches such as infrastructure sharing and other approaches. We have also taken note of the studies review of various Universal Access Fund and Universal Service Fund models by UNSCAP, which found out that effectiveness of such funds have been limited due to various reasons and challenges. It also noted that lack of data hinders in effective management of public investment projects and development of rural broadband initiatives. Moreover, national and provincial level funding and partnership with independent policy research institutions and universities may address this issue. I also took note that we have actually reached the target of less than 2% of GNI per capita for mobile service. While affordability and mobile network performance remains to be a challenge for the Philippines to both service and handset. I'm glad that you have referred to the Philippine Development Plan targets and status. And many regions have underperformed as presented in Table 9. I'm also it's interesting to note that the research made some comparisons between a LEO satellite provider and cell site, the bandwidth throughput that can be provided by cell sites. Just perhaps to point some corrections. I think the NTP being referred in the research is referring just to one portion of the NTP, which is NTP 11 in Luzon, because there's also NTP 12 in Visayas and NTP 13 for Mindanao. And RTDP has phase 3. Yes, but it's actually called phase C, and that is to support the implementation of the previous phases of RTDP. The municipal telephone project has private sector implementers, and MTPO has only implemented in provinces not identified by these telecom companies. And TSBs was also implemented by the private sector, but not as interested compared to MTP. I was flagged that I have to stop. Can I continue? Or should I just mention my other inputs during the Q&A?
Yes, you can add to your manifestations during the Q&A. Probably you can close your reactions very quickly. ASec Varilla.
Yeah. Well, uh, I agree with a lot of the things that that the research presented. Perhaps in addition, the NBP and the free Wi-Fi programs have to be integrated and supported by government. Right now, under the free Wi-Fi, we were able to provide the internet services to 6,041 LGUs and NGAs. We have provided 3,404 schools with internet. That's public elementary and high schools. In addition to 1,071 SUCs and local government unit owned and controlled universities and colleges, plus 23 libraries. On health side, we have provided digital connectivity to 1,455 hospitals and rural health units. We have also established government emergency communication systems with our move sets. That's mobile. That's a mobile operation vehicle for emergency, which actually has mobile command centers, dispatch vehicles that would go to the incident command post, and the motorcycle to go to ground zero. And that the DBM also can also help us in providing additional plantilla positions to the ICT for connectivity. Yeah. Time is up. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll just mention some other things later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ASec Varilla, for your insights. I guess from my end, there are mixed appreciations. When we heard the presentations from our authors as well as from our discussants. Seems that we have a lot in terms of barriers to universal broadband access. But then again, we have a lot of opportunities for improvement. We can cover more households, more individuals, more communities. Probably we can augment in terms of public investment on info and infrastructure, as well as augment policy on sharing. And in the end, the government should earn more. And probably such earnings can be plowed back in terms of public investment. Okay, so before we go to our open forum, may I request our presenters, our authors, to react very briefly to the manifestations of our discussants. May I start with Dr. Ramonette. Dr. Ramonette, can you share a bit of insights from the discussant's point of view?
Yes, thank you so much for your comments. So I think we've received two suggestions for future research. One is on the revenue side, to focus on the revenue side of achieving universal broadband access. The other suggestion was to look at or to update the studies on impact of broadband services and connectivity. So those are well noted. I am happy to note that the National Broadband Plan is being updated. And if there's an opportunity for PIDS to assist in this effort, please feel free to get in touch with us. You know that you can always ask us for informal or formal assistance. Take note of the errors with respect to the different specifics on technology. I guess it reflects our own limitations in this particular field because obviously our training is not in engineering or technology, but that's not an excuse. We will correct those errors, and in the next iteration of the study, which is probably an research paper series or a journal article, we will correct those errors. What else? I like the slide of the World Bank where they have the 4 clusters of interventions. I think linking that with the table that we have on the role of government and the different types of interventions on both the demand side and the supply side. If we link that together, then it's really going to the next stage of making more practical suggestions on how to design programs and interventions moving forward. I think those are my comments at this time. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Dr. Ramonette. It's Mimi. A few comments on the presentations by our discussants.
Other than the ones that Dr. Serafica had mentioned, we are looking forward to having the NICTHS updated data so that we can further analyze the progress of the broadband service in the country.
Dr. Kris, your reaction.
Yes, I just would like to thank Naoto for putting forward a very, very good idea on putting a coverage component in the franchise of mobile operators. I think this is a very good idea that we can leverage, to expand the reach, especially in rural areas, because most of the time they won't really invest in those areas. And then I am also happy to hear from ASec Varilla that they are meeting up with different sectors to improve the guidelines on infrastructure sharing. That is a really, really positive news. And that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kris. Before we go to the open forum, may I request our participants to actually send in their questions via Zoom through our chat box and via Facebook Live through the comments section. Indicate your names and affiliations. Okay, Dr. Kris mentioned the manifestation by Naoto-san. I guess we start from there. A very big question is, Naoto-san actually pointed that we should prevent the digital divide from growing into more development divides. So that's, I think, a very good slogan moving forward. The danger now, I think, is more apparent because he also flagged the growing access gap among the poor and the more endowed subpopulations in the country. So given those concerns, how do we go forward? Who wants to answer first? I think Dr. Ramonette, would you like to answer something regarding that?
I'm sorry, you mentioned that. So how do we prevent the digital divide from
growing to more development divides?
Okay. So
development divides.
Development divides. When we read the literature on the digital divide or connectivity or broadband connectivity, the emphasis is always not just on the supply side, but on the demand side. So, and the focus now is meaningful connectivity. So, especially because we're using public funds, we don't want these resources to be used just for, unproductive use of the internet. So, I think one intervention is really to understand the demands and make it specific to the community. If it's a rural community or agricultural community, their needs might be different from a community where, for example, you have retailers or SMEs that would like to engage in e-commerce. So making sure that digital connectivity is anchored on the broader development needs of the community, I think would lessen the issue that you have raised.
Thank you, Dr. Ramonette. I guess in a lot of your recommendations, you pointed to augmentations in terms of boosting the demand side aspect. But I guess in the presentation of Dr. Kris, she highlighted issues about the supply side of the barriers towards having that universal access to broadband. Up to the point that such barriers are now really the bottlenecks, no, in terms of us looking at that universal access and us looking at possibly market dominance within the sector. Dr. Kris, can you comment on that? Demand side, supply side concerns. How do we go forward most optimally or applicably given what we have now?
Thank you, Dr. Sunny. At least for me, this suggests that there really is a need to have further research to further understand the demand. Because for me, it's logical that people have different use of the internet. So that would also mean that they would require different bandwidths because some people would use it for work, some people would use it for studying, and some people would just use it to. So this should be incorporated in our policy as well. So it's at this point, I think the need for us is to further understand this variation in demand, so we can further cater to these differences and adjust our policies as well. Thank you.
Thanks. So better understanding, I guess, ASec Varilla flagged entry points for further research. May it be in terms of us augmenting the supply side or the demand side of everything. I think right now, we are looking at the institutionalization of the NBP, also manifested earlier in the presentations, as well as us augmenting the free internet access in public places implementation. Those were passed, I think, in 2017, a year after the institutionalization of the ICT. So they were very busy a year after their establishment. But looking at what we have now, I think number-wise, we have a lot of room for improvement. Dr. ASec Varilla, can you comment on that?
Yes, there are actually a lot of things that are being done by the DICT right now about boosting demand for broadband, and there are actually some items that were identified, no, in the paper. On e-government, no, in addition to what I mentioned about providing connectivity, is our effort to come up with digital applications and services and digital platforms that would allow government agencies to support each other and helping them to put just one data together. There's no need for multiple entry of data, you know, in the platform. So it will be easier for government to deliver the services needed. And we're also helping local government units through our ELGU programs. So basically, for the ICT, it's very important that the government becomes effective, no, in delivering the services, no, to the people. So that's one. Education, of course, in addition to connectivity, we provide Wi-Fi and digital connectivity to schools and universities. We are also helping to provide ICT literacy to our people, no, through the digital transformation centers, or previously called Tech for Ed centers. And of course, we are partnering as well with schools and even TESDA centers to deliver ICT related content, no, to the people. On health, we are actually discussing with UPPGH, no, on trying to support their Doctors to the Barrio program. So something that we also want to happen to help our people in the countryside get a good to receive good medical care. So something that we also want to happen. Of course, on emergency response, as I mentioned, we are doing a lot in partnership with the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Center, as well as the different disaster risk reduction management offices in the region and in provinces and municipalities. Yeah. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ASec Varilla. So I guess there are a lot of things on the table of the ICT. But going back to the numbers, I think Mimi flagged that in 2024, we have only around 12,000 live sites for free Wi-Fi. You mentioned a lot of those sectoral interventions: health, education, DRRM, resiliency, and you linking with the institutions involved there. But the end goal, I think, by 2025 was also mentioned, and it's around 104,000 live sites. So, Mimi, can you share some insights? I think this was part of your presentation earlier.
As was mentioned, there are a lot of implementation issues that happened. That's why the goal was not near the actual numbers. Although, as I have watched the recent celebration in ICT month, that one of the leaders in the ICT mentioned that the national broadband program that is in progress right now will accelerate the implementation or the deployment of free Wi-Fi program. If it could be elaborated more, that would be great.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Mimi. So it's really probably the ICT pushing forward with complementary programs, and in this case, the MVP and the free Wi-Fi implementation. I think going to another quotable quote from Naoto-san, he mentioned all of these things are good if they are doable. So we've seen the target number-wise, and we've seen the actual accomplishment of the bureaucracy by 2024. So what can you say about that, Naoto-san? Are we targeting doable things, universal broadband access-wise?
Are we targeting right things to do or doable thing? Answer is mixed, right? But it has to come from the two sides. One is, what is the outcome that matters? And the second is, what is the meaningful input and intermediate outcome that matters to contribute to the eventually important outcome? To me, providing 102,000 free Wi-Fi sites is not a meaningful indicator of the success. The 102,000 includes the schools and hospitals and government offices in areas where internet is already provided well. So the design of the free Wi-Fi program, as prescribed in the law, leaves room for revisiting. So this is the important work that the policymaker has to be on top of it. It's not the job for DICT. DICT, receive the mandate and deliver on the mandate, but is the mandate right? Or is the way the mandate is tasked to the executive branch of the government to deliver is optimal? And then I bring up the revenue discussion in this context as well. So that's one thing. To me, the outcome that matters is the connectivity provided to the population, including in rural areas and the far-flung areas in an affordable manner. And position infrastructure to free Wi-Fi site, not as ends, but means. And then I think earlier this week, Undersecretary also mentioned the ongoing work between the ICT and the World Bank on using the World Bank funding to expand and implement part of the National Broadband Program and the free Wi-Fi program, with which we are working very hard to make any doable, meaningful, and scalable improvements in this.
Right. Thank you, Nato-san, for that response. I think what you highlighted earlier about us being compared suboptimally with our neighbors in terms of broadband access requires further elaboration. I think Dr. Ramonette can shed some light. Are we babying the industry? For example, we've been saying that we have been getting less revenue-wise from them. We have two major operators covering around 90% of the service. And they are not really obliged to expand to our rural communities. That's one. And Naoto-san flagged that we are getting 3 to 10 times lesser compared to our neighbors' revenues from the sector. What are your thoughts about this, Dr. Ramonette?
Yeah, so very interesting results from the World Bank in terms of comparing our industries, our companies, and companies of other countries. And as we all know, we have a long history in terms of allowing our private sector to dictate the development of the telecommunication sector. So I think moving forward, or no, even now, there is really more focus on strengthening competition in telecommunications, because ultimately, in any industry where you let the market or private sector lead, the best tool by the government is competition. So that is why the proposal in the Konektadong Pinoy is very, very important, because it will remove a lot of the barriers to entry that have been experienced by different participants in the data transmission industry. So I think that's number one. It's really about, you say, are we, binibaby natin yung industry? I guess let's just focus on what we should be doing now. And that is, as I mentioned, the first intervention of the government is really to enable the industry to grow and make sure that competition, meaningful, effective competition, is introduced in the market. And then, I guess the World Bank had these clusters of intervention. And then in the areas where it is really not viable, that's where the government assistance and direct intervention can come in.
Thank you, Dr. Ramonette. So I mentioned enhancing competition. And I guess we can relate that to the manifestation earlier by Dr. Kris, because she mentioned moving forward, having, for example, that third telco coming in a few years ago, and them not really taking in so much in terms of the market share, industry-wise. That says a lot in terms of competitiveness or the competition landscape. I think a lot of that relates to the sharing of info and infrastructure, as also manifested by Dr. Kris earlier. Dr. Kris, can you elaborate further on that,
Okay,
given that angle?
Let me just elaborate on it. I think part of the reason why market competition is what it is now, because our telecommunication sector is vertically integrated. So we allowed, I don't know if it's absence of regulation or we weren't really thinking about it in the beginning. It was private sector driven. So they own the infrastructure. It's not really the government's infrastructure. So what the government is doing now is to put up its own infrastructure and then eventually offer this to new competitors. So in a way, the space wherein the government can move has become smaller because the sector is vertically integrated. So it's difficult for it's difficult to ask them to share their infrastructure that they have invested so much money into. I think that is a very very valid and good reason to why our market for telecommunications is at this stage right now. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kris. I think we have several questions coming from our participants. One of these is questions for ASec Varilla. And this one is from Daniel Agustin of the Institute of Corporate Directors. Do we have an approved universal broadband plan for the Philippines? And we've been talking about universal access to broadband, but do we have this right now, ASec Varilla? And is it being grounded or implemented properly?
It's actually, yes, there was actually a presentation made earlier about the National Broadband Plan. And this was issued in 2017 as well. That's the basis of the implementation of the National Broadband Program, as well as the implementation of the Free Wi-Fi for All program, the Free Public Internet Access Program. The different initiatives coming from the government are actually coming from ideas from the broadband plan. We are now updating it since there are some new realities that are in place right now, different technologies, potentially different relationships between and among players, government and the private sector as well. With the new PPP code, LGUs are encouraged to partner with private sector to provide the services to their constituents. So these are things that we can integrate, incorporate in the new broadband plan. Thank you.
Okay, ASec Varilla, I think partly what was being referred to was the issue about institutionalization. Because coming up with that national broadband plan, I think it was anchored on institutional application or grounding, right? And then we see, for example, the focus of work from the sector and from our regulators for 2023 to 2028, focusing on further institutionalizing the national broadband plan. So where are we now? The same concern anchored when the NBP was first initialized or commenced in 2017 is probably the same concern that we have right now, which is bureaucratic institutionalization of the plan. Can you comment on that, ASec Varilla?
Yes. Yeah, basically, there are some issues related to the implementation of the plan. In the Philippine Development Plan, we mentioned about issuing a National Broadband Act. And some of the issues related to the development of a national broadband network is already or are already in the Konektadong Pinoy Bill. But perhaps it can be complemented with some detailed guidelines later on. No? We are also going to include active infrastructure sharing in the bill, because it was not inserted initially in the bill. So infrastructure sharing is very important to us, as mentioned by the different speakers. So the DICT is also recognizing that in addition to passive infrastructure sharing, we can actually implement active infrastructure sharing as well, with the right guidelines. And I thank PIDS for mentioning some principles that can be the guide, no, for developing the guidelines.
Okay, thank you, ASec Varilla. I think this next question is for Naoto-san. Naoto-san, you mentioned earlier our deficiency when compared to our neighboring countries, not only in terms of revenue, but also in terms of probably investment within the sector. What do you suggest as the best ways forward for the Philippines to actually deliver the outcomes you also highlighted earlier? Naoto-san, please.
It's a trivial question. I don't yet have a clear and simple enough answer yet, but a few things that I still keep grappling with, right? And then we need to mobilize and partner across to make a bigger thing happen. To me, seeing the digital divide through the access gaps in the rural areas and the rural household is also important ends in itself, but also part of the broader economic policy reform agenda and the growth agenda. We want growth, but we want inclusive growth. But for it to take place, we have to have the big telecom industry participants, operators who can profit from expanding the network coverage, increase more, profit from the increased revenue, and then reinvest in areas commercially less profitable. The government can't just ask the kind favor from the operators to sacrifice their profit, because they're also under their governance framework and the shareholder pressures. And for the economy to take advantage of digital opportunities, a lot of things have to happen at the same time. So extending the connectivity, making it more affordable is one, but for supplying and demanding, or let's say fostering the market for supply and demand for the data for productive use has to come together. Otherwise, more people will be connected and just use Facebook. That's not what we want. That's part of what we want, because it's delivered certain means, but what's obvious in the data we have on the limitations of the data market in the Philippines is that from ITU and telegeography, there's a useful indicator on gigabyte per month per capita data traffic over internet. And it's shown with fixed and mobile internet. There's no data for fixed internet for Philippines, but all the regional neighbors have skyrocketing data traffic. We know fixed access is so limited so that it's not even worth for them to collect the traffic data. For mobile, of course, the traffic per capita per month has been rapidly increasing, but at a lower pace than peers. The Philippines data traffic is lower than Indonesia, or lower even than Cambodia. That tells me that people spend a lot of time on social media, but not sending and receiving data a lot. The Philippines is largely on the consumer side of the global data platform ecosystems, not developing AI much, but just using AI, or not yet using, for the most of the population. Philippines has a very important asset, the IT BPO industry, as a driving service exporter and employment generator, who has to adapt and develop technology and expand the economic participation. Connectivity plays its important role, but building digital workforce and fostering connectivity, data, and applications and value generation almost at the same time should enable big telecom participants to make profit and reinvest. Otherwise, I mean, there's no way to kill the industry by trying for the government to trying to fill the digital divide. So, I mean, I know I'm saying something that's a lot. Yeah, but I mean that's what it is.
All right. Thank you, Nato-san. You flagged, I think, a very interesting item in your manifestation. I think this question is for Dr. Kris. It was mentioned that in terms of the quality of data traffic, we have less compared to our neighbors. Does this connote that we are not using our infrastructure properly or optimally? Dr. Kris, can you have your articulation there, answer-wise?
Using infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we using our infrastructure
using it?
in the most productive way, given what Nato-san mentioned, that we have less in terms of quality of data traffic?
I actually don't have a very good answer.
Is it
for
also
that. Yes. I think it's because yeah. Thank you, Naoto, and that is a very interesting point. I think it's because we really don't have the data to actually see what is happening. But the one that he mentioned that they have the World Bank has data on gigabit use for mobile. I think that would be useful because I am thinking of what if we just map all over the Philippines how people are using the data, how data traffic is being utilized in different parts of the Philippines, so that we can take this into account on the kind of demand for data that they have. It's just a basic characterization based on the areas, because I think that would be very, very useful for the government to ensure that what they need is being provided for them. And then what Naoto-san, the other point of Naoto-san is to actually increase the usage and make sure that they use it in a productive way. I think that is an important but also another difficult target to achieve. So from our review, I'm not sure if we gathered something or a policy related to that so far. Maybe Ma'am Monette can help me with it, but hindi ako sure. Pero parang wala eh. Wala pa.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kris. Yeah, probably a very intangible discussion afterwards related to this. But there seems to be that discrepancy in terms of our demand, how we use our infrastructure, and probably that refers also to the level of education and probably productive activities of our population. Now, going back to competition, and probably Dr. Monette can answer this. It was mentioned that we have very weak competition in the industry, and that probably points to us just having 3 major telcos operating and just 2 actually dominating. But it was also mentioned that this industry is most profitable, yet it is least invested. So how do we push our private sector counterparts to actually invest more in terms of developing our infrastructure and not just rely on government for public investment related to this? Dr. Monette, please.
Yeah, I think there's still a role for government, even if the private sector would be incentivized to provide services in remote areas. Given the gap that we have, I think we should expect that the government will still play a very significant role. Maybe one of the incentives or possible solutions so that the private sector can better develop or develop better products and better services is if they also have the information that we mentioned earlier that we need when we collect data on how communities are actually using the internet. So information, the surveys that we conduct these are public goods, right? So private sector, industry, the government, those of us in research, we should have access, we should invest in understanding the behavior of the consumers, and also so both as an input to the development of programs, and also to help the private sector develop services and applications that will meet or that will respond to the demands of the community. So I guess also just a comment rather is that it's difficult to just isolate or pinpoint profitability and say that there's something unfair happening. We have to look at a host of factors, and maybe if we also ask the private sector what are the difficulties that they're encountering, they can also provide inputs, and because ultimately, of course, the decision to invest will come from them. So you need their inputs to help us better understand what else they would need to encourage them to invest in the countryside. And yeah, I think they always mention the difficulties in terms of permits and licensing. That's a number one issue for them. So, we have to have more information and conversation among stakeholders to address the gap.
Thank you, Dr. Ramonette. The bottom line, we need to better monitor and understand the industry. Excellent. We have more questions here, but unfortunately, we've run out of time, as always. So before we actually close our webinar, may I request our presenters and discussants to provide your final statements. May I start with Ms. Mimi? Mimi, please. Final thoughts.
For me, there are a lot of promising programs that the government has been utilizing now. The most important thing is, of course, to monitor them if they are their progress is within the objective and within the timeline. And as what mentioned before, is ultimately the role of broadband is to facilitate more productive way of life for all Filipinos.
Thank you, Ms. Mimi. Naoto-san, can we hear your final remarks?
3 quick points. One is a lot of discussion points today is in principle to be addressed through implementation rules and regulations for the Connected on Pinoy Bill once it becomes enacted as a law, and a lot of work to substantiate it, including on the last discussion on competition, definition of the significant market power and the role of NTC and PCC to work together. So let's be prepared to that. The second point on addressing connectivity gaps by optimizing both revenue and expenditure side within and beyond the DICT program, and there has to be a lot of work to be done. The third is what I mentioned last on the broader landscape of growth and inclusive growth across different layers of the digital economy, and there has to be a lot to be done, both at the national and also regional and global level, where the Philippines is actually a very good contributor given the open stance for the cross-border data flows and the contribution to the global service consumption through the IPBPO. So this would be, to me, a key takeaway that I will get back to you and further discuss.
Okay, very good, Nato-san. ASec Philip, your final statements, please.
Yes, well, we really need a very good monitoring and evaluation system that is starting with application process and submission of documents from different players in the industry, the use of ICT tools to collect, analyze, and report developments, as well as partnership with academe, LGUs, government agencies, NGOs, and the private sector in the collection of data, analysis of data, and actions to be taken coming from the analysis of the data. So I agree that there will be a lot of work, especially in relation to the Konektadong Pinoy Bill. And we really hope that it can be pursued and enacted very soon. And we also would like to align our activities to the ideas that were mentioned in the research of our three authors. And all of this, we would like to thank PIDS for giving us an opportunity to be here, especially now that we are celebrating the National ICT Month. And the theme of this year's ICT Month is Bayang Digital, ang Bagong Pilipinas. And through this, we would be having gobyernong epektibo, Pilipinong konektado, at kinabukasang progresibo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ASec Varilla. Dr. Kris, final statements.
Yes, I think a lot has been said, and I just would like to thank everyone for the chance to present our study. And I think that the inputs that we gathered from Naoto-san and ASec Varilla today is very, very interesting, and it further enriches what we have put forward in our paper. We hope that our fruitful discussion translates into better regulations and policy framework for the realization of higher broadband access and also higher broadband usage that will help power our economy's long-term growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kris. And finally, our lead author, Dr. Ramonette, final statements.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you so much everyone for participating, for spending your morning with us. Thank you so much to ASec Philip and Naoto-san and to Sunny for taking the time and sharing your inputs. We will endeavor to improve our study. In terms of final messages, I guess, we know that we have a long way to go in terms of bridging the digital divide. The issues are complex, and we've tackled the institution, the regulator in past studies. We've tackled the specific regulatory regime. We've tackled competition issues. And so for this morning, since our focus is on the programs, I want to build on what Queen said and what ASec Philip said about, let's improve before we come up with more initiatives. Let's look at the ones that we have now, and let's try to fix and make sure that they are working so that we build better, whether it's soft programs or infrastructure. I guess that's my message. Thank you again.
Excellent, Dr. Ramonette. Okay, so we've come to the conclusion of our event this morning. We thank our very amazing panel for all those inputs and valuable insights. And of course, to our audience for the active participation and the questions. So let's give everyone a very big round of applause. Okay, so before we officially close the program, let me announce the raffle winners. For those joining us just now or this time in this webinar, we choose 2 winners from our Zoom participants and 1 winner from our Facebook Live participants. So our winners for this morning are from Zoom. First one is Maureen Soto from the ILG Bureau of Local Government Development, BLGD. And the second one is Meg Reganon from Nathan Associates. So 2 winners from Zoom. And our sole winner from Facebook is Raina Porzuelo from Parañaque. Congratulations to our winners. The PIDS Tech team will coordinate with you on how to claim the prizes. So once again, we appreciate your attendance this morning. Speakers' presentations will be available at the PIDS website, flashed on your screen. Meanwhile, you may download a copy of the study from the link provided in the Zoom chat box and Facebook comments section. Please help PIDS improve our webinars by answering our feedback form through the link provided in the Zoom chat box and Facebook comments section. Please note that the e-certificate of participation will be sent to you automatically following submission of your feedback. So provide feedback, and get your e-certificates. Your feedback and recommendations will make our upcoming events better. Keep in touch through our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, X, and YouTube for more updates. Also, feel free to visit our websites for more information. We hope to have you again, of course, in our future events. We have upcoming events on June 13, 18, and 27, as indicated in your screen. Please visit our webpage to know more about such upcoming events. Finally, we would like to thank our participants from the government and private sector, academe, civil society organizations, the international development organizations, of course, for joining us today. We hope you've gained valuable insights from today's presentations. As we move ahead, let us remember that collaboration between national and community levels, as well as public-private partnerships, will be key to realizing the goals of digital inclusion and connectivity in the country. So thank you, everyone. And again, have a pleasant day ahead.